Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the second lecture of day 2 of the Astrology and Relationships Summit. It's been so much fun so far, and I'm so glad all of you are here and having a great time. And we're going to keep doing that today. And today we have Kelly Surtees with us to give her talk, Saying I Do, Cycles of Commitment in Relationships. So thanks so much for joining us, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Tony. I'm really thrilled to be here and connect with all the amazing students and community that you have here at Astrology University. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know that it is Sunday and you might have relaxing things to do, so I'm very happy and excited that you've decided to spend an hour with me, but I know many of you are probably spending many more hours with Tony and the team today, and why not? There's so much great info out there. So I wanted to share a couple of explanatory points just before I dive into my presentation today. My talk today is a little different from the style of classes and webinars that I usually teach. My usual style is sort of a how-to or a, learn this thing. And today I'm giving more of an intermediate style presentation where my intention is to demonstrate timing techniques in action. So rather than teach you what transits are and what progressions are, I'm going to dive in with 3 real life examples from my client files and show you what was going on for these 3 individuals at 2 significant points. First, we're going to look at the timing for when they met their person, and then we're going to look at what, if anything, was going on significantly when they married that person. So one of the reasons I wanted to focus this talk in this way is actually because somebody asked me. One of my mentees, who's a fellow practitioner themselves, and they were very curious at one point in their training and development. They sent me an email asking, what are some of the transits that you've seen during a marriage or a proposal? And, we often get that question from clients in our practice anyway. And I thought I wanted to come up with something a little bit more succinct as we can be, but to really try and answer, what does it look like in the birth chart when you might meet your person or get married to your person? So this will hopefully give you some ideas of the types of transits and the secondary progressions to look for, or that when you see in the chart, you might be able to more confidently forecast a significant meeting with a romantic partner. So when I first conceptualized this talk, I really wanted to focus on the timing of saying I do, the marriage ceremony. But when I got into the research, I discovered that the timing of when you actually meet your person was much more compelling. And on reflection, that seemed to make sense, because while a wedding or that marriage event, the start of a marriage, is very important, it represents a continuation or a development of something that's already in play. So we will touch on what was going on when people got married, but I'd like to also make sure we spend time on what was happening when they met that person. Okay, so we have 3 examples. 2 of the examples are for people in opposite sex relationships, and 1 of the example is for a person in a same-sex relationship. So I wanted just to make sure we covered a few different types of relationships here rather than, just stay in one lane. So that's what we'll be having a look at today. Okay, so with that out of the way, we shall dive in to our examples and our charts and our official presentation. So let me get that up on the screen. And it always takes me just a moment to do that. Okie dokie. And hang on one second. We're just getting all of this sort of sorted here. There we go. Okay. Zoom's a little funny compared to how it used to be. So I just like to make sure we've got that there. Okay. All right. So cycles of commitment, getting to I do. We are going to start with a quote by Rumi, one of my favorite mystic poet, philosopher, spiritual guides. And this is a quote that I think should guide a lot of our relationship astrology work. And this quote says, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." And the reason that I think this is an important quote is that it changes the perspective of someone out there needs to come in and all of a sudden my life and my love life will be perfect. Rather, it turns our orientation towards ourselves in terms of how do I need to grow or develop or even heal in some instances so that I can be more open and welcoming and more able to participate in a relationship. Now, this quote is sort of also our inspiration because what we're looking at today is timing. We're looking at the dynamic chart, the chart in motion, or the chart, your birth chart being affected by things in motion. And really what we're looking at is, okay, I don't have what I'd like to experience now in a relationship. When is that likely to happen? And for changes in our external life to happen, we do need to have shifts internally. We either need to have a progression or a transit of some kind to help us grow, to open us up, or to bring us into a place internally where we can make that type of connection. So the question that is sort of central to my inquiry that I'm going to share with you today is, when will I meet my person? And one of the things that I wanted to sort of dance between is that we're often told this is the theory that you should look for. You should look at Venus, or you should look at Mars in the chart. In traditional astrology, we always focus on the ruling planet of the descendant or the seventh house as well. And if you're coming to this as more of a modern astrologer, or you haven't seen traditional astrology in action before, then that might be a new concept for you right there. So you just have a look at the zodiac sign on the descendant in your chart, and then you would identify the traditional ruling planet of that sign. So quick clarification, that's Mars if you have Scorpio there. It'll be Jupiter if you have Pisces there, and Saturn if you have Aquarius there. Now, I don't think I'll have time to go into all the whys and wherefores around those rulerships today, but we do have other classes on those that you can take if you need more. But that's the idea I'll be using as we move forward. Of course, the ascendant degree and the descendant degree, we tend to focus on the descendant because it's part of the seventh house. It's to do with relationships. I see just as much activity to the ascendant and the first house in terms of timing when I'm looking at relationships for clients. And so when we take that idea that relationships are often a very specific type of vehicle for our personal growth and development, it does make sense that we're going to see a lot of ascendant or first house stuff going on. The sun and moon can definitely bring in relationship stuff. Mars, especially if we're talking about relationships that have that sexual fire as part of it. So not every romantic relationship, not everyone will want a romantic relationship with that sexual fire component. But of course, that type of energy is represented by Mars in astrology. So the simple theory is you look at the places in your birth chart, and for most of us, it's going to be Venus, the ruling planet of the descendant, and then the ascendant and descendant themselves. Look for transits to those points or progressions involving those points. One of the other pieces of theory that we always get told is don't start a relationship when Venus or Mars are retrograde. And one of the examples we're going to see today goes some way to maybe disproving a bit of that theory, because we did have a fairly long-lasting relationship begin under a Mars retrograde. And I have just picked 3 examples today, mostly because we only have an hour together. So just to show you some of these theories and ideas in action. Keep in mind that the theories of what things should look like are just a starting point. They're a guide, but they're not set in stone. And one of the biggest challenges we have when we're doing timing in astrology is to try and connect with the chart in such a way that we understand the uniquenesses or the unique pieces of this chart, and that chart can then speak to or communicate with us directly. Okay, now some of the things that I have seen, that was sort of the theory slide, and what do I actually see? Surprisingly, I've seen, or maybe not so surprisingly, as we've been discussing, a number of times transiting Jupiter in the first house when we start a major relationship. You will notice there is some text shorthand as we're going. So the capital T stands for transit, just to save on space and to avoid clutter. So the theory might be transiting Jupiter in the 7th house, and that can help, but transiting Jupiter in the 1st house can also help. Progressed personal planets changing signs. So if your progressed Sun changes signs, progressed Mercury, progressed Venus, or progressed Mars, if they change signs in your progressed chart, that can indicate quite a substantial shift around relationships. And part of the piece here is that it's almost like a big part of you evolves or changes, something different. The Mars function or the Venus function starts to operate and manifest differently within you. And that can trigger different types of desires. It can also help you meet or connect with different types of people or new people. And it just brings in a sense of kind of a breath of fresh air or new possibilities. So they are some of the things to start looking to. The third point here, progressed personal planets making aspects to the natal chart. So we'll see a number of examples of this in action as we go today. What they tend to show is an activation, an opening, or even a type of awakening that creates almost like a portal in time where different types of interactions and encounters become possible. So that can, put you in the right place at the right time to meet someone significant. Surprisingly, transiting Uranus and transiting Neptune show up a few times in our examples today. And I know we often have a lot of fear with outer planet transits, but when you start to see how they might interact with other things in the chart, certain types of Uranus transits and Neptune transits can actually help enough of your insides to change and develop that we have that spark of connection with someone new. Not really a surprise to see transiting Saturn involved, either at the time you first meet someone or at the time that you do say I do and get married. Saturn, of course, is a planet about longevity, about commitments, and also about things that have substance. So I'm hoping, if nothing else tonight, to dispel a little bit of fear about Saturn transits and relationships. Definitely, I have seen Saturn transits where, you get the reality check about something that's not working, and you will sometimes see endings with Saturn transits. But as I said, in certain types of situations, we're actually going to see the meeting of the person. So let's get into some of those examples. But just to give you a summary of some of the techniques that I'm going to be covering and looking at today. So our first case study is a client who met their person in January of 2010, and they got married in December of 2014. So they're kind of the timelines that we're going to have a little look at. So let's take a look at the birth chart to start. We have a Capricorn rising chart with Cancer on the descendant. So here we have a moon-ruled 7th house. And this is a very traditional astrology way of looking at things, that we consider the planets as being of primary importance. The signs do factor in, of course, but when we're talking about relationships for this individual, we will look at Venus. Traditional astrologers definitely looked at Venus, particularly for the topic of marriage, but we're also going to consider the moon. And right now, we're not interpreting the natal chart to see how likely relationships are for a person or not. We already know in these three instances that these people are going to meet someone and marry, and we're just going to use their charts as examples of timing. So we've got the moon in Taurus, Venus and Mars together in Taurus, all in the 5th house. For those of you who might not be familiar with my approach to chart work, I do use the whole sign house system. That might be different for you if you're used to working in a quadrant-based house system like Placidus or Co, or even Porphyry. So you might just need to make a little bit of adjustments here. The ascendant and the descendant along with the MC and the IC, will be floating degrees that sit inside their respective houses in the chart. There's a lot of theory and philosophy about why I use this house system. Again, I don't think I'll be able to give you that sort of 10-minute explanation today. So, you know, everyone will have a different opinion on whether you do or don't like whole signs. I can just show you how I use astrology because that's what my experience is with. So we're going to dive in here and have a look at what was going on for this person in 2010 when they met their person, their romantic person. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start with the transits. This isn't how I would approach it in practice, but when I'm teaching, I know many of you are more familiar with transits than you are with progressions. So we'll start with transits, and then the next chart I'm going to bring up is this client's progress chart for when they met their person. So in January of 2010, we had Saturn in early Libra. So we actually had Saturn sitting on this person's MC, which is maybe not a transit you would think as being indicative of major relationship stuff, but the MC, there is hints of this in some of the older literature on relationships in astrology, that even though the MC isn't primarily about relationships, it is about your profile or the ways the world defines you or labels you. And whether you're paired up or single, that does factor a little bit into sort of the public side of the MC. So this was one of the transits they were having. Now, Saturn was actually stationing retrograde at 4 degrees Libra that month, I believe. So stationing right on the MC. Now, again, we often get very worried about stationing planets. But this is an example where it contributed to a significant event. A comment from the chat box, I can see there that in the context of this birth chart, Saturn is a little more significant, and we're going to see this thread running through. The reason for that is it's a Capricorn ascendant chart. Now that ascendant at 18 Capricorn would be the same in any house system, and the MC at 4 Libra is also the same in any house system. Just the visual display is different depending on whether you're quadrant or whole sign. So Saturn on the MC, also keep in mind, Saturn on the midheaven only happens 2, maybe 3 times in your life, depending on how long you live. One of those times can happen in childhood. One of those times can happen much later in life. And you might have one of those cycles happen through the middle, kind of more productive or active years of life. Another exciting transit that we don't often think to look for. In 2010, you might recall Uranus was winding up his tour of Pisces. And at this time in early 2010, Uranus was completing about a year-long transit of making squares to the sun in this birth chart. So Uranus was squaring the sun for the 3rd time in what was a sequence of 3 transits. Now, what I'm referencing there with that sequence of 3 is that major planets like Saturn and then the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, will often activate a point or planet in the birth chart 3 times. They will make the aspect once while they're moving forward, they retrograde backwards, make the aspect again, and then they start moving forward again and make the aspect for a 3rd time. So for those of you who are more familiar with transits, I wanted to include a little bit of that technical info. And for those of you who aren't familiar with transits, I wanted to introduce that concept so you'll at least have it to work with. So with a transit like Uranus, you'll usually have about 4 to 6 week periods in about a 10-month time frame where Uranus makes that exact degree-based aspect. Excuse me. The other major transit that was going on, we had Pluto in early Capricorn, and Pluto was making a square. Pluto was at 4 Capricorn, making a square to that MC as well. So just from a transit perspective, we had 2 big transits to the midheaven degree, and we have Uranus squaring the sun. Now, personally, I'm not sure that I would necessarily call major relationship just off that. What I'm going to do now is introduce the progressions, which I think will start to speak a little bit more to the topic of relationships, and that the combination of the two, I think, will really help you improve your forecasts. So we've got the transits out of the way. Now I'm going to put up a bi-wheel. We're going to see the natal chart in the center and the secondary progressions for this person in the outside wheel. So don't get overwhelmed. I know it's very common for students to do that, but I'm going to take you through this piece by piece. When we're working with secondary progressions, not everything that's going on in the secondary progress chart is equally important, and not everything is important at every single point in time. So we just want to keep that in mind. So there's a lot going on here. I'm going to just track us through to the next slide where I've highlighted basically the 4 or 5 things that I think are most important in the context of progressions at this time for this person. So first up, we have the progressed MC is conjunct natal Uranus. Now you can imagine that's only going to happen once, if it happens to you at all. And it's going to create a very busy, exciting, unpredictable time in a person's life. It's talking about openings and awakenings and exciting but new experiences. We already saw that there was a lot of activity to the natal midheaven with transiting Saturn at 4 Libra and transiting Pluto at 4 Capricorn. So now we're getting this reflection of midheaven activity in the progress chart as well. Okay, so the next piece that I just want to mention very briefly, the progressed ascendant had just moved on to the natal part of fortune. Now, I don't want to necessarily get totally sidetracked by the part of fortune, but generally to say that it can be helpful or lucky or indicate that you're in the right place at the right time. Now, that's not necessarily going to say, oh, you meet your person, but it tells us that you're in generally a fortunate period in your life where most things are going to seem a little bit easier or a little bit better for you. Okay, now over to here, I want to talk about Venus and Mars. We can see that I've highlighted progressed Venus, who's come up to 11 degrees of Gemini. That puts her in an exact trine to natal Pluto. And now we're starting to get a little bit more explicit romantic or relationship type activity, given that one of Venus's topics that she manages for all of us is relationships and love. So that's an indication that for about 12 months, which is approximately how long it will take Venus to progress through 11 Gemini, that we're going to have these more intense, these more profound, and these deeper types of relationships forming. You could certainly look at that and think, well, Venus rules the MC. This could indicate something going on at work, and that may be true as well. So we'd need to offer both interpretations to our clients. We could talk about taking on more powerful roles in the workplace, but we'd also want to honor the other side of Venus about the new intensity in romantic relationships as well. Now, I saw a question there about not including progressed Jupiter on the natal Venus. No, because that aspect is still nearly 5 years away from being exact. If you have a look at the degrees of progressed Venus, at this particular time, she's at 11 Gemini, and natal Jupiter is at 15 degrees, 57 minutes in Gemini. That is almost 5 degrees away, and approximately that's about 5 years of time. So we would definitely want to check back in with the client or see what that might indicate, but that's not something that's going to be most active at this particular point in time. Okay, now the other planet that I want to mention, because this I think is really significant. Progressed Mars is getting very close to changing signs. Progressed Mars, as we look at it in early 2010, is 29 degrees, 31 minutes of Taurus. Now, for any of you who do know about things like essential dignity or sign-based strength or weakness of the planets, you might be familiar that Mars technically is considered to be in detriment in the sign of Taurus. And so when we see one of the relationship planets, whether it's Venus or Mars or the Sun or Mercury, moving out of a sign where it has some limitations and into a sign where perhaps it's neutral, as Mars moving from Taurus to Gemini is, we're going to see a removal of limitations or barriers coming in. So the interpretation for, say, progressed Mars changing signs, when there's a dignity change, indicates an improvement around the type of the caliber of the sexual partner that's coming into the person's life. So we want to keep that in mind, that something's improving here, that we're breaking maybe old patterns, that things that haven't worked before are going to get better. Now, I'm not saying they're better just yet. We still have about 9 months before Mars will make that sign change exactly, but we can see that he's on his way, which is excellent. The other indication here is the progressed moon. You can see the progressed moon there at 1 degree of Leo. And it's not so much that the progressed moon has moved into Leo, that's helpful here, but more importantly, that the progressed moon phase is new. Now, remember, this is a chart where we have a moon-ruled descendant, and so the moon phases in the progressed chart become super important. In fact, one thing that I observed over all the examples we're looking at tonight, every single person had their progressed moon phase in the waxing condition. Some of them were very close, like this one, to the progressed new moon itself. The progressed new moon for this client was about 7 months before they met their person, but we can see the moon has crossed into that new growing forward part of her cycle, which is very helpful. So there are some of the things that I wanted to use to illustrate. One of the key things with timing in astrology that I think is so important, there's no one answer to the question of when will I meet my person. It's not a one size fits all scenario. We need to look at the chart in context and see how each piece adds up to part of the narrative. So the progressed descendant on the part of fortune, generally good. There's just a nice positive vibe. Progressed MC on natal Uranus. We've got something exciting, something you haven't experienced before, something new. You're getting out of your comfort zone, but you're ready to grow and progress. Progressed Mars changing signs, moving out of its detriment. There is a big improvement about partners and interactions in that sexual intimacy area. Progressed Venus, trine natal Pluto, we're going to get new depth and intensity, a real sense of maybe substance or more of a meaty, like there's really something here with this person. Factor in the progressed new moon phase here, and we're very much ready to move forward. Okay, so let's take a scooch forward to have a look at what was going on, or what, if anything, had changed at the time they got married. So that's a list of everything we've just run through. So you'll all have access to review this afterwards if you want to make notes. At the time, January 2010, we did have a Mars retrograde and a Mercury retrograde just going on in the sky in general. And in this case, that was not a barrier to this person meeting their person. So just to dispel a little bit of those rumors there. The reason that I want to mention that is, in your personal birth chart, if you're having a major progression or a major transit, that will override whatever sort of minor irritation or annoyance of Mercury retrograde or Mars retrograde. You'll still meet your person. Maybe it takes you 10 days to schedule your date or to go from first date to second date, but you've already met them. That's the key. So just to keep that in mind. Okay, so when they got married, just making sure we've got lots of data here, what had changed? Because the time frame from meeting, so meeting was January 2010, marriage was December of 2014. So almost 5 years after. Okay, so what had happened at that time? Remember when they met, the progressed moon was here at 1 Leo. Don't mind my crappy drawing. At the time of the wedding, progressed moon at 4 degrees of Libra, exactly conjunct the MC. And so we often forget the progressed moon as an important trigger or a timer. The progressed moon will only be on the midheaven once every 27 years. already know the midheaven's important for this person in the context of relationship, because there was a big transit with Saturn there when they met their person, and now the progressed moon has come to the MC and we're going to get them saying I do. In addition to that, transiting Saturn had now finished its tour of Libra, and it is coming up to the end of its tour in Scorpio. And at the time they got married, Saturn was at about 28 degrees Scorpio. So it was just past the only opposition it was going to make to their natal moon. Remember that in this chart, the moon is especially connected to the topic of relationships because it rules the 7th house. And so Saturn opposing the moon is as when the moon is ruler of the 7th is a wonderful indication for that type of lifetime or long-lasting commitment of marriage. At the same time, we also had transiting Uranus moving through Aries. So Uranus had moved from late Pisces, where it was when they started dating, and was now making a trine to their natal Saturn. We know Saturn's a little important for them because Saturn rules their ascendant. So we've just got that lovely sense of excitement and newness and freshness going on there. So there was another transit from Neptune. Neptune was now in early Pisces, making a square to natal Mercury. That was something that was going on in their chart. I'm not sure that I would say that that hugely speaks to marriage necessarily, maybe the romance of it all. The wedding itself was beautiful on a country property. It did go off without a hitch. They had, I guess the Mercury in Gemini was there, and that they had a small wedding on the country property, and then they did have a party back in the city a week or two later. So I wonder if that speaks to that a little bit. You can see a request just to display the previous slides. I'll just pop it up there briefly if you want to take a quick screenshot. It will be in the recording for you. I don't have time. I've talked through all of those pieces already while we had the chart on, because I know it's more helpful to see the chart. And this is the summary of what was going on at the time of the marriage itself. So you've got all that data in there. So the charts we're looking at are the chart of the person, the chart of my client. And we're just looking at the transits and the progressions that were happening for them when they met their person and or when they got married. So that first example we had a look at is the longest example that we'll take to go through today. There's a lot of activity in that chart, but not every chart that you look at is going to have that many things going on at once at any given time. You might just have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 dynamic activations, then they can bring a partner in. And we're going to see that in some of our examples moving through as well. Okay, so case study 2. This is someone who met their person. Okay, the dates are back to front there. I beg your pardon. I'm just going to double check because, of course, now we're having a slight, got all the data here. So I do apologize here. Those years are back to front. They obviously met in 2004 and got married in 2005 because you're not going to do that backwards. So yes, I hope sorry, I apologize for that typo on that. I do know that I've got the data in here correctly, so I apologize for that text error. So here is the next birth chart, and these are birth charts of people. Yeah, so what I wanted to try and recreate here is where what I wanted to recreate was the type of experience you would have if you were consulting with people. You're going to have someone come in, they're going to be asking you about the year or the next couple of years, and you're going to be trying to interpret life and topics for them based on that. Okay, so next chart, different chart, very different chart altogether. We've got Aquarius rising in this chart. We've got Leo on the descendant. We see Saturn in the 7th whole sign. And we've got Venus here in Libra in the 9th house there. So the sun could also be a planet that we might look to for relationships because it rules the 7th. And in the previous example, we saw a lot of midheaven activity. May not be the same here, but we will let the chart tell us what it is going to share with us. Okay, so let's go back to, here we go. So August of 2004, and this example is actually a dear example to me because this couple met in Australia, which of course I always find a little bit more fun and fabulous. So when they got together, I'm going to do my drawing here. One of the big transits this individual was having, transiting Neptune over the ascendant. And that is surprisingly a transit that does show up a lot in terms of meeting someone. And I think the internal process that it often describes is this idea of letting go, of surrendering. There's a lot of this idea of give and take when you go into a relationship with someone. And so Neptune on the ascendant can speak a little bit to the softening around that. Of course, Neptune on the ascendant, if it's problematic, can make you see things that aren't really there or get overly hopeful about something that doesn't have substance. So we're going to hope that there's a little bit more than that. But we had, for this individual, transit Neptune was actually going to make 5 passes over their ascendant. That sometimes happens with the slower moving planets based on where they're stationing, that they might activate the same degree 5 times rather than 3. So this was the first. When they met them, it was the first out of the sequence of 5. Transiting Saturn was square natal Jupiter. So transiting Saturn was making a square to natal Jupiter here. Saturn was over here in Cancer at that time, squaring natal Jupiter. Why is Jupiter important in this chart? It's the ruling planet of the MC in Sagittarius. So one of the pieces that we talk about in traditional astrology a lot is the ruling planet of the ascendant and the ruling planet of the MC as being really influential in describing the life as a whole. So that was another transit they had going on. And we had transiting Uranus was in early Pisces and making a square to the MC itself again. So we are seeing a little bit more MC activation. So this is the transits for when this client met their person that would become their spouse. What we're going to do now is so we had transiting Saturn, square natal Jupiter, which is important because Jupiter rules the midheaven. We had transiting Neptune on the ascendant, and we had transiting Uranus in early Pisces square the midheaven IC axis. Okay, so let's have a look at what the progressions were at that time, because this is such a great example. One of the reasons I love using this chart for teaching, it dispels some of the fears people have about Uranus, because look at this progressed Venus conjunct natal Uranus activation. Progressed Venus is very tightly conjunct to natal Uranus at 348, progressed Venus being at 347. That's very close. That's sort of a once in a lifetime aspect. And we've got this once in a lifetime meeting going on. These are 2 individuals, neither of whom are Australian, but they're both traveling in Australia and they meet very randomly. So this is the progress chart for my client when they met the person that would become their spouse. So we're looking at the natal chart in the center and the progress chart around the outside there. The other significant progression that's happening, and we sometimes forget about progressing the angles, the progressed ascendant and descendant do move through the chart. And in this case, we have the progressed descendant at 3 degrees of Libra. So it's just a little past the natal Venus, but we can at least see that we've got a vibration there, reinforcing what's going over here with the Venus-Uranus progression. So there's just a couple of things going on here, but significant enough that we have the meeting. And don't forget, this is a couple that meets and they get married 12 months later. So it's a lot more quick, if you like. There's a lot more that happens in a short space of time, which might speak to some of these situations. We can see that the descendant has progressed into a cardinal sign, into Libra. Remember that cardinal signs do like to develop things quickly. And even though progressed Venus is moving through Scorpio, she is connecting with natal Uranus, which is going to also develop things quickly. We also see here that progressed Venus has changed signs just a few years beforehand, maybe 3.5 years prior to their meeting. So that's something to keep in mind there as well. Okay, so when they get married, it's only 12 months later. We're not going to see a huge amount change in the progressed chart. The progressed moon is actually still at the tail end of Pisces when they get married. So there isn't a huge amount that's going to change progressions-wise for this particular client. Here's the summary slide of what we've just talked about in terms of the transits and progressions for when they met. And now I'm going to, yes, somebody, great comment there, Elizabeth. I wanted to see if anybody would pick that up. This client has Venus very dignified in Libra in the 9th house. Let me tell you a little bit about this couple. They're both from 2 different countries, so they're not from the same country. They met in a 3rd country while they were traveling. In the early years of their relationship, they had their 3 children, and each of those 3 children is born in one of the countries. So one child is born in Australia, where they met. One child is born in one parent's country, and one child is born in the other parent's country. So you can imagine how much moving around was going on for this couple in those early years. So we do see a lot of those Venus 9th Libra stories there. They're just a really sweet pair, the 2 of them, but we're seeing a lot of those 9th house signatures coming through. At the time they married, it was only 12 months after they met, but a very significant planet had changed signs, and that is that Saturn had left Cancer and moved into Leo, creating the Saturn return experience. Now, both people in this relationship are around the same age, and when they shared this info with me, they did say, we consciously decided to get married on our Saturn return. They didn't know anything about their birth charts personally. So this person didn't know the Saturn return was happening in the 7th whole sign house for them, but they just thought the idea of Saturn and commitment made sense to get married, and that's what they did. Now, in addition, for this particular client, the Saturn return coincides with transiting Saturn, reactivating the natal Venus sextile Saturn aspect. So it was sort of an intensification, maybe a timing on bringing to fruition that Venus sextile Saturn aspect, and we have the wedding. In addition, Jupiter had moved into Libra. So when they met, Jupiter was here in Virgo. Jupiter changes signs approximately every 12 months. And so by the time they got married, Jupiter was in Libra. Now, Jupiter, we would say technically in traditional astrology, was co-present with Venus. Jupiter had moved beyond the degree of Venus itself, but was certainly activating that lovely 9th house and just amplifying Venus there in Libra. Transiting Neptune was still near the ascendant for this individual. So that transit lasted about 18 months, all through the first part of their relationship. So a different type of chart, a different type of story, but we still have a couple coming together. And a lovely comment in the chat box here about how these aspects might seem hard at first sight, but they do kind of work. I think in this chart, Venus being quite dignified in terms of being in Libra in the natal chart, it's really helpful just to bring out more events with more positive outcomes, even from transits that might look a little bit more difficult. Also keep in mind in this chart, the ascendant does sextile Jupiter, which is again helpful just in general. And I think too, sometimes when we see an aspect like a transit or a progression that we think could be hard or difficult, sometimes it's the circumstances around the couple that express that challenge. There was a lot of issues to do with visas and paperwork, and can we stay in this country, or do we need to go to that country, and have we got the passports for everyone? So there was a lot of that type of thing going on for this couple in those early parts of their relationship. Okay, so yes, and transiting Jupiter was opposite the natal Jupiter for this individual, and Jupiter we saw being important as the MC ruler. Okay, so our final case study, and we're going to do this one a little quickly because it is more brief, and I know we are getting closer to the end of our time. I'm just going to say this once more. It is the client's natal chart that we're looking at here. There you go. So yes, everybody does have their Jupiter opposition around the same time as their Saturn return. Not everybody will have a chart where Jupiter rules the MC and or has Saturn in the 7th house. So you do want to anchor it into the natal chart itself. Okay, so here is an example. We have this individual, we're working with my client's charts, so we're looking at their charts through this process. They meet their person in mid-2012 and they get married in April of 2018. Let me just take this back while I'm talking here. So this is the final slide of the previous example, just to have that there if you want to quickly grab that. Okay, got to keep moving. So this client had been single for 9 years prior to meeting their person. And I think that's just an interesting detail to have, and also a wonderful story about how it is possible to meet someone after an extended period of being alone. Okay, so a different kind of chart again. We do have an Aquarius rising. I know we've had an Aquarius rising chart before, but you'll see this chart looks very different. Here we have a big collection of planets in the sign of Virgo over in the 8th house. We can see the moon and Jupiter in the whole sign 7th. And in this chart, we're going to also pay a little bit of attention to the sun because it is the ruler of the 7th house there. This chart, funnily enough, does have Venus in Libra in the 9th, but this is not a story about people meeting overseas or marrying someone from a different country. This is a different kind of story. Okay, so, excuse me. I just want to make sure I've got all my notes here. Okay, so when they met their person, which was in mid-2012, let's grab the transit. Some of you might remember what planets were where at that time. We had transiting Jupiter in Gemini, which is generally nice in the 5th house. That's going to, excuse me, I think transiting Jupiter in the 1st house or the 5th house or the 7th house is a starting point. It's a door open to the possibility of this could be a time for a great relationship if other transits and progressions confirm that for the individual. So we're also going to see transiting Saturn is moving through Libra at this time, and oh, that's not the drawing tool I want, making squares to Mars in this chart. I'll just draw that in for you there. Mid-2012. So Saturn is winding up his tour through Libra, but definitely coming to the end there, mid-2012. And so they're the two big transits that kind of stood out to me at that point in time. In this chart, there's a very specific progressed aspect that I think speaks to the wow factor of this. Mars in this person's chart isn't sort of super intimately connected to relationships, other than, of course, that Mars does rule, in traditional astrology at least, their Scorpio midheaven. And in all our examples, we have seen activations to either the midheaven itself or the ruling planet of the midheaven at the time they've met their person. Progressions for this person at that particular time. Look at that progressed sun. Just coming up to 27 degrees. So it's 26:59 minutes of Libra, and we've got natal Jupiter there at 27 degrees, 44 minutes of Leo. So the way I work with progressed aspects is as soon as the progressed planet comes into the degree of the natal planet, the influence opens. And so as soon as that progressed sun gets to 2700 degrees of Libra, it's really pulling in the Jupiter energy here. So we're very close to that. And really, you know, we can't have hard and fast lines. Planetary energy comes in and out like a sunrise or a sunset. It's not like a light switch. The progressed sun, remember, is the ruler of the 7th house in this birth chart. And so what is the best aspect that progressed sun can make to, you know, in the chart would be to Jupiter, because Jupiter is very helpful. This is a daytime chart. The person has the sun above the ascendant descendant axis, which means Jupiter can be a little more helpful. And so here we have, if we were timing this one, to me is a little bit of a no-brainer. And this was a client who I've worked with for many, many years. And they said to me, you know, we had done their session 6 months, I think maybe 6 months prior to this. And we had talked about this aspect as being, this progressed aspect, as being incredibly lucky and very supportive, particularly for growing and expanding and developing relationships. And they did come back to me after the fact in the year, you know, the following year when we're doing the next year ahead. And they said that, you know, this is what happened and I'm so excited and isn't it amazing? All of those types of things. So we can see that wonderful progressed sun to natal Jupiter. Now, in this chart, the sun helps out relationships specifically because the sun is the ruler of the 7th house there. So the moon phase is also important. We are technically in the progressed balsamic phase, but we are only 4 weeks away from a progressed new moon happening. So the energy of this moon is that it's deep into and has already started that birthing and new process. So I think we can definitely see this new 30-year life cycle beginning, and that's a wonderful kind of encouraging aspect here as well. The progressed MC has come to conjunct natal Neptune. So here we do see some more Neptune vibes coming through, where there is perhaps a letting go of a particular type of public identity. You've been a single person for a really long time and now you're not going to be, and other things along that particular line. In addition, the progressed descendant has come to 18 degrees of Virgo, and you might note that natal Saturn is at 18 degrees of Virgo in this person's chart. So here we have the descendant, the progressed descendant, the point that looks to do with relationships and how they're changing and representative of relationships at any given month or year of your life, sitting on Saturn, the planet that represents this person because they have an Aquarius ascendant. So Saturn is them. We have the relationship on them. This was someone that they did meet through their work, and there was a friendship for a few months. And what we're looking at is the progressions for when that they became romantic, when there was a sense of, yes, we want this in the more romantic setting, if you like. So that's the activations for this person when they met the person that would become their spouse. That's their progressions. We've talked through their transits already. What I want to do is take a quick look at their wedding stuff. And this was one of those charts where there really wasn't a huge change with the wedding. The more significant things were what happened when they met, or when the relationship started, when there was that sense of meeting combined with intention and the manifestation of attraction, which led to those things being acted upon. So if we have a quick look at what was going on for them at their wedding, their progressed Venus had moved, progressed Venus, I think, was around 19 degrees of Scorpio. So it's just past the MC Uranus. But at the same time, we had transiting Jupiter coming in to sit on the midheaven, on the natal Uranus, and activate that progressed Venus. To add extra juice into this, their spouse has their ascendant at 20 degrees of Scorpio. So this combination, you know, the spouse's ascendant is 20 Scorpio, their midheaven is 16 Scorpio. We're dancing into synastry territory in terms of compatibility here, but we can see a lot of activation at that degrees, or near those degrees, but 16 Scorpio and 20 Scorpio, which is their spouse's ascendant. Then we've got this person's progressed Venus is there, and transiting Jupiter has come in to really amplify and intensify. And we have a beautiful wedding between these two people. So in this case, it very much feels like the Jupiter transits were a wonderful way of marking the growth, the expansion, the forward progress in the relationship here. Was there anything else? I think the progressed descendant at the time of the wedding was getting close to the natal sun. It wasn't quite there, but it was certainly close. But the big thing was the transiting Jupiter there as well. Okay, so I know when I've done other talks on timing in relationship, I've looked at the timing of breakups, I've looked at the timing of people getting together, we've done a whole cross section. The intention with this talk was to primarily focus on the timing of commitment and getting together. So that's what I've done. Of course, we only have an hour together, so I can only share some very specific info, but hopefully I've given you enough tips and ideas to encourage you to go and play around with some of these techniques. So this summary slide here pulls together that last piece. So just a couple of points as we're pulling it together. Here is our a little bit of a summary slide. All the clients we looked at had waxing moon phases. You can meet your person when Mars is retrograde by transit, as in case study number 1. We did see some Saturn transits here, both to do with Saturn transits that were happening when people were meeting people, but also at the time of the wedding as well. Outer planets can be involved, and it can be positive. I've certainly got many examples of outer planet transits doing difficult things in relationships, but we can see them going both ways, and that's the key. If you combine the outer planet transit with the progressed moon phase, you will start to get a real sense of, oh, we're growing and moving forward, or this is like more of an ending separation vibe. The planet ruling the descendant was important, as was the planet ruling the midheaven, which you might not have thought to consider. And we definitely want to keep an eye on progressed planets or progressed angles making aspects to the natal chart itself. I know there was a lot of info into today. I do have courses that will show you how to do this and learn these techniques, but it's always important to keep in mind that there's no one size fits all. We do have to explore the chart as a whole, and we have to combine a few different timing factors to get a real sense of the focus or the flow. What and where relationships come from in each chart is so unique. So do take time to identify the ruling planet of the 7th house. Make sure you know what the ruling planet of the midheaven or the ascendant is now as well. And mostly my hope is that you'll use these cycles as an opportunity to grow and to remove any internal barriers to connection, intimacy, and togetherness, so that when you too have some of these wonderful cycles, you're ready to kind of dive in with your person. If you want more on these techniques, or if you think, oh, Kelly, I want to know more about transits or progressions or relationship astrology, I do have courses on that. You can jump on my website, kellysastrology.com. Here's the pathway. You go to the Learn Astrology tab, go to online courses, click on intermediate students, and then you can select Learn Astrology Timing and Prediction, where you can learn about transits and progressions. Or if you just want to dive straight into relationship astrology, you can take my 4-part training on relationship astrology, which is a combination of synastry, temperament, so compatibility stuff, as well as the timing material that I've talked about here today as well. So if we've got questions, I've got time. Tony, how are you going? How is everybody doing in the chat boxes?
Great. I have some questions from the Q&A window. Several people asking the same question, Kelly. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that meeting of the first date. People have different opinions about that, but people are asking, what if the dates of the first meeting and the date you start dating are different? Someone asked, what if you don't have a clear first time of meeting? And for instance, acquaintances that develop into a relationship, for instance. And then Sue asked, do you use the time they met or the time they have the first meaningful interaction? And somebody else was asking about online meetings versus in-person meetings. So a lot of questions there about the timing of the meeting.
That's great. Great. I love to hear those questions coming through because it shows me that you're all thinking about the material and really looking to understand where to start with the material, which is great. So in two of the examples I used tonight, I conducted a survey with a bunch of my clients about 4 or 5 years ago, and that's where some of this data had come from. And in two of the examples tonight, when I said, you know, one of the questions was, please tell me when you met your person, the answer to that was, we met on X date, but we only got together 3 months later or 6 months later. The getting together is the key. So if you meet someone and you're friends or you kind of know each other, it's that first interaction where there's either some physical contact or there is a real discussion around, I like you and I want to have a date with you. Now, when we're doing timing like these transits and progressions, if you've got a few weeks between when you first met them and when you first kind of go on your first date, you could really just look at that month. You know, you don't necessarily have to go down to the hour or the minute. Things like transits and progressions, particularly some of these longer transits or these longer progressions, will usually be in play for a 4 to 6 week period at a minimum. So you don't necessarily have to get I'm going to tease Tony a little bit here. You don't have to get super Virgo about this in terms of what was the exact moment we first kissed. If you know approximately that, you know, where and when you connected, or it was August of this year, or it was sometime in the second half of this year, you will be able to get insight from your transits and progressions based on that. Does that answer, was that all the questions, or did I only get part of them, Tony?
I was busy responding to some other things in the chat window, Kelly. So
that's okay.
I'm sure,
people will let us know.
Yes, I'm sure he spoke to it. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording for now, but we will hang out with you. As Kelly said, she has a whole course on Intro to Relationship Astrology that you can find through Astrology University. The course is actually the same on her website as well. I know that can be confusing, but they are the same in case you have that question. And
people sometimes ask, should I sign up on your site or Tony's website? It doesn't matter. You'll end up in the same place, and you know, it's not. It does just sign up where it's easy for you is what I would say to people.
And the course is actually delivered through the Astrology University portal. Yeah. So all your courses are going to be in there at the end of the day anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
Except the monthly membership, which is on my website, I think.
Speaking of the monthly membership, before I stop this recording, I just want to mention that something really exciting happened last week. We finally got approval for the app version of Kelly's monthly membership. And the monthly membership is where Kelly talks about the transits and timing and everything about the month ahead. So she releases 6 videos each month where she talks about all, you know, the timing for the month ahead, and you get all of her detailed thoughts about that. So she shares a bit of that info on the podcast that she does. But if you want the detailed Kelly, the Kelly Show, this is the place to go for that info. And you'll be able to get it as an app very soon. It's not quite ready, but the approval process happening took about 2 months. So now that we have that hurdle crossed, you'll be able to find the app in your favorite app store sometime very soon. So watch for that coming soon. But for now, if you want the online version, which of course you can look at on your phone through a web browser, you can get that on her website and just click the information there about the monthly membership. Adriana says, yes, it takes forever to get an app approved. I just found that out.
So, we're just learning this.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. And we'll see you again very soon. And until then, take good care. And thanks so much again, Kelly.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tony. And thanks everyone for joining us.